Folks, I just wanted to cover the networking in Cosmos DB, in this case the SQL database variation of it, and I played around with this today because I was curious about the settings in Terraform and how they affected if we select public access enabled. I'll just show you the settings I have here for clarity on this and a bit of context around it. It's the usual data-driven architecture, folks, that I've used in my previous videos. If you've watched them, you'll pretty much understand the flow. So we're calling a reusable module. We're driving all these data settings down into the Terraform itself, folks, and then the infrastructure is getting built from this. So we're looking at the Cosmos DB from enabling public access. So we've set this here to true. What we then got is a list. If I split this here, in fact, folks, might make it a little bit more clearer. So if we look then at our next setting here, folks, we can see that there's an IP filter range. What these here IP addresses are, the first four, are allowing portal access as per what the comments are here. I've put them in there for a bit of clarity. So if you're in there and looking to use Data Explorer and, you know, run queries in there, then you will be able to use them because these IP addresses are in that filter range. They are mapped via documentation. You can see here for an API for NoSQL account, that's what I've set up. Then the all category are added, so it's giving you this in the documentation, so I've added them in there for that purpose. If I come back then, that's that bit. The next bit that's not very clear, folks, and you will find this is all part of working in the cloud. So network ACL bypass for Azure services, and this can be set to true. And as per the documentation here, folks, it says when you enable this option, which we've set to true there, the IP address 0.0.0.0 is added to the list of allowed IP addresses. Actually, it doesn't. You need to go in and add that as well to your IP range filter. There is a open issue. Well, actually, it's closed, but they closed the issue and said, yeah, this will be fixed down the line. It's not yet fixed. So what it says, like with Azure Cosmos DB, an IP of 0.0.0.0 needs to be added to the firewall rules. So that's why I've done that there, okay? Because the documentation alludes to the IP address is added. Now, whether that's the wording is wrong and it's meant to say, you know, must be added, you know, but that means the same thing, then it just needs to be made more clear. So maybe that will get corrected down the line, but just to, you know, share that info with you guys in case you are stumbling across the same thing, okay? Because when you change some of these settings, just point to note with network rules and the likes, it takes a long time, folks, for the Terraform configuration to run through the changes. If I come back to here, in fact, I'm just about to destroy the infra. That's why everything's showing up as destroyed. I will show you the previous action for a change here, which was on this main apply, and you can see, folks, it took 8 minutes there just to do that last change, which was to add that bypass for Azure services in. So you want to be getting these sort of right on the first hit, because that does throw an error according to this gentleman here. You'll just get a firewall you're not able to access because it's blocked, because it's not actually on the IP allowed range. Okay, so that's that one. Also, whenever we do add that in there, it does say in blue writing, it does a plus sign and it says bypass for Azure services. So when you add it in, it'll appear there. Okay, also you can see there the portal middleware IPs are added in. That's the ones in the range already to allow Data Explorer and the queries and the data management access from the portal. And then we go down to network access bypass resource IDs, folks. I didn't set that there because it was pretty straightforward. It was for app services functions or logic apps, or, you know, services without service endpoint capabilities. Going back to or coming down to this one here, virtual network rules, we actually set up the VNet with a subnet that has the service endpoint enabled on it. There is a setting in this here, I haven't got it set here, but it allows it to be set to true or false, which basically says, if I come down to the variables, in fact, the main here, if I come down, just go back up a bit. So virtual network rule, and ignore missing VNet service endpoint. So what that'll allow it to do is actually add the subnet here, even though it doesn't have a service endpoint enabled. If I come to here, if set to true, the specified subnet will be added as a virtual network rule, even if its Cosmos DB service endpoint is not active. So it defaults to false. Ignore missing VNet service endpoint, false. So if set to true, it'll add the subnet, even though it doesn't have a service endpoint, or if set to false, then you need the one with the service endpoint. So it defaults to false. I've actually stuck it in there as a default of true, I believe, in my variables. Yep, it's very much like working with storage accounts, Azure storage accounts, when I'm setting up the network rules there. The Terraform documentation and what actually happens in your Azure portal sometimes differs. It's really easy to get lost in the wording, especially of the Terraform or the Microsoft documentation like we've just seen there. So if I come back to my data-driven file here, that'll take us to the bottom of all of these. Good practice, as I say, I'll not go through everything here, but local authentication disabled, true. Yeah, we want it controlled via RBAC, role-based access control, and I've did further settings here to use role-based access control assignments, folks, in setting this up. This is the variation of this Cosmos DB with public network access enabled true. The other flavor of it will be public access enabled set to false, and we set it up with private endpoints, folks. So that's the next step once I get this one over the line and peer reviewed by the folks I work with. But I just wanted to share those little bits and pieces with you, folks. If you found out anything more about Cosmos DB around the networking side of it, drop a comment in there. As always, I leave this one with you, and I'll wish you all the best. Take care and good luck.